A wealthy businessman once met a fisherman who had everything he was chasing and wanted none of it. What Solomon said that morning on the dock didn't just confuse Richard, it stopped him completely. And it might stop you too. Hey, welcome back to Streams of Wealth, where every story we tell is designed to make you think differently about money, freedom, and what a good life actually looks like. Today's story is about two men who met on a quiet dock at sunrise. One had built a business empire worth millions. The other owned a small fishing boat and a modest home by the sea. By the end of this video, you're going to question something most people never stop to ask. Not how do I make more money, but what is the money actually for? Let's begin. Richard was the kind of man who measured everything. He measured success in revenue figures and quarterly reports. He measured his worth in the size of his office and the make of his car. He had worked 70 hours each week for 20 years, building a business that most people would call extraordinary. 3 companies, 40 employees, a penthouse apartment in the city that looked out over everything he had built. And yet, on the morning he meets Richard, he is sitting on a plane feeling completely empty. He is flying to a coastal town for a business acquisition, a small local company he plans to absorb into his empire. Just another deal, just another number on a spreadsheet. But something about this particular morning feels different. He looks out the window at the clouds and realizes he cannot remember the last time he felt genuinely happy. Not satisfied, not accomplished, happy. He pushes the thought away, he always does. The plane lands, and Richard goes to work. The coastal town is quiet in the early hours. Richard arrives at his hotel before dawn and cannot sleep. So he walks down to the dock, coffee in hand, to clear his head before his morning meetings. That's where he sees Solomon, an old fisherman, maybe 65, sitting on the edge of the dock in worn clothing, fishing line in the water, eyes half closed, a small smile on his weathered face. Beside him, a modest catch already in the bucket. Richard watches him for a moment. Then, the way businessmen always do, he starts calculating. It's barely 7 in the morning and this man is already done working. He has maybe a dozen fish. He'll sell them at the local market, make enough for the day and go home. Richard sits beside him. "You're done already?" he asks. Solomon opens one eye. "Enough for today," he replied simply. "But it's early," Richard says. "You could stay longer, catch more." Solomon looks at him with quiet curiosity. "What would I do with more?" And just like that, Richard didn't have an answer. Now, here's where most people hearing this story think they understand it. They think it's simply about slowing down, about working less. But what Solomon says next goes much deeper than that, and it's the part of this story that almost nobody talks about. Stay with me. Richard, being Richard, couldn't let it go. "More fish means more money," he said. "More money means you could buy a bigger boat." Solomon nodded slowly. "And then?" "A bigger boat means you catch more fish faster. You could hire people to help you, build a small fleet." "And then?" Solomon said again. Richard was warming up now. This was his language. "You scale it. You open a processing facility. You supply restaurants across the region. In 10 years, you could have a real business." Solomon turned to look at him properly for the first time. "And then what?" he asked. "Then," Richard said, spreading his hands as if the answer was obvious, "you'd have enough to retire, relax, enjoy your life, maybe sit by the water in the morning, fish a little, take it slow." There was a long silence. Solomon smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't need words. He looked back at the water, then back at Richard. "Sir," he said quietly, "what do you think I'm doing right now?" Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. He sat there on that dock for a very long time after Solomon picked up his bucket and walked home. Not checking his phone, not running numbers, just sitting there, watching the water for the first time in 20 years, doing absolutely nothing productive and feeling strangely like it was the most important morning of his life. Here's what this story is really about. Richard spent 20 years building towards something Solomon already had. Not because Solomon was lazy, not because Solomon lacked ambition, but because Solomon had done something Richard never stopped long enough to do. He had defined what enough looked like for him. And then he had built his life around that definition instead of constantly moving the finish line further away. Richard's problem wasn't that he worked too hard, it was that he had never once asked himself the question Solomon lived by every single day. What is all of this actually for? Financial freedom isn't just about accumulating wealth, it's about knowing what you're accumulating it for. It's about having a clear picture of the life you're building toward so that when you get there, you actually recognize it. So that you don't spend 40 years running toward a finish line that keeps moving every time you get close. Solomon wasn't refusing to be rich. He was refusing to be confused about what rich actually meant to him. And that clarity is one of the most valuable things money can never buy. So, here's my question for you today, and I want you to sit with this one honestly. If you reached your financial goal tomorrow, the number, the freedom, the life you're working toward, what would your perfect ordinary Tuesday look like? Not the vacation, not the big purchase, just an ordinary Tuesday when you have nothing you have to do and everything you want to do. Can you picture it clearly? Because if you can't, then, like Richard, you might be running very hard toward a destination you haven't actually decided on yet. Solomon knew his Tuesday. He was living it every morning on that dock. The goal of building wealth isn't to never stop working. It's to one day work only on what you choose, when you choose, for as long as you choose. Know what your dock looks like, then build toward it, on purpose, with intention, one quiet decision at a time. If this story made you stop and think, even for just a moment, then share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe to Streams of Wealth, because every single week we bring you another story just like this one. Stories that don't just motivate you for 5 minutes and fade. Stories that actually change the way you see money, time, and the life you're building. I'll see you in the next one.